between 17 and 35 Christians are killed per day in Nigeria. They are wiping entire Christian communities off the map. And I'd like to point to a specific incident that happened in June in Benue State, Nigeria, in a town called Yelwada. Christians were massacred. Half of them were burned alive. The other half were killed because they were trying to escape being burned alive. And the government did nothing.
And who is it that's doing the killing?
Nigerian news works this way. Let's say an attack occurs. The Nigerian government says this attack's bad enough, we actually need to address it. So they put on a press conference. They pay the journalists to show up, and the journalists are told to rewrite what the government told them to do. There's no investigative journalism, there's no questions, it's just they come up with a press event, the Nigerian government makes its statements, they write it down, and then it goes out. Current state of the Nigerian government is guilty of being complicit in the killings against Christians. The military and the police, according to all of our evidence and documentation, is that they are ordered to stand down when attacks occur. There is very little evidence of any police or military engagement when these massacres happen.
Judd Saul, welcome to Real Talk with Zuby. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thanks for having me on, sir. It's a pleasure.
Fantastic. Well, Judd, you are doing some very important work, and you have been for many, many years. So please tell my audience who you are and what it is that you do.
My name is Judd Saul. I'm the executive director of an organization called Equipping the Persecuted. We have been a boots-on-the-ground mission in Nigeria since 2019, responding to attacks within 48 hours, doing the best we can to respond to those attacks. We've been solely dedicated to helping persecuted Christians in Nigeria in any way we can, not only with humanitarian aid, but also trying to work on preventative measures to stop the killing.
And for people who aren't familiar with the situation that's been going on in Nigeria for the past couple decades, and which is finally getting more international light now, can you just give an overview of what's going on?
Well, currently what's happening is over time, over the last 30, 40 years, you've seen incremental increase in radical Islam invading Nigeria from the north, and they've been conquering little by little, community after community, over a certain period of time. And what we're witnessing right now is a major clash of that, because it's now entering very large Christian populations. And they have systematically been trying to take out one Christian village after another. I call it death by 1,000 attacks. And since, I'd say, over the last 20 years, we've seen well over 600 Christian communities completely wiped off the map. And the survivors of these attacks and the survivors of these from these communities have been shoved and pushed into what we call IDP camps, which stands for internally displaced person. And currently there's over 3.5 million Christian IDPs. And as far as the killing statistics are concerned, 7,000 Christians have been killed since January 2025 alone. But on average, between 17 and 35 Christians are killed per day in Nigeria.
Wow. And who is it that's doing the killing?
The main perpetrators of the killing are the Fulani ethnic militia. This is a tribe that's not indigenous to Nigeria, but they have been slowly moving in from the north, from Chad, Niger, all over the Sahel, and they have set their eyes and focus on Nigeria. And they have the goal of turning Nigeria into a caliphate. And it's been the Fulani ethnic militia. You have Boko Haram up north, you have ISIS of West Africa doing their thing, but the genocide against Christians has been committed by the Fulani ethnic militia.
And how long has this been going on for my listeners?
It's been going on for a long time, very, very slowly, but you saw things pick up in 2001, actually during 9/11. There were major attacks that happened in Jos, Nigeria, and that was kind of the launch point of this new conquest. And then over time, especially under the last three presidential terms here in Nigeria, where we've had a Muslim president for the last 3 terms in Nigeria, and you saw the attacks rapidly increase because they've gotten more political cover and more military cover, allowing the terrorists to commit these attacks.
Yeah. And just for my listeners who are not familiar with the geography of Nigeria, and I don't necessarily expect you to be, the north is predominantly Muslim, whilst the south is predominantly Christian. There are hundreds of different ethnic groups in Nigeria, as well as hundreds of different languages. So it's one big country that probably should be a lot of multiple countries. I think when a lot of Westerners think about Nigeria and other African nations, they kind of just think, well, everyone's black, everyone's Nigerian, so they're, all kind of the same community. It's not like that at all. And some of the tensions that exist between the different tribes and ethnic groups are much, much, much higher and far more inflamed than what people might consider racism, say, in North America or in Europe. So despite people, on a surface level, perhaps looking similar to an outsider, there is a lot of tension, and there has been for many, many decades, if not centuries.
Yeah, Nigeria essentially was a British colony. They came in and they just drew artificial borders and said, this is going to be Nigeria, without any regard for the tribal areas, the tribal territories, the the various groups. And they said, you're going to be one country, and that's it. And then after Nigeria gained its independence, those factions, those different groups, there's always been conflicts between various tribes. But what Nigeria is facing overall is an invading tribe from the north that doesn't care about the other tribal territories. They want to take over Nigeria for themselves. And that's the situation we see ourselves in now.
So out of curiosity, Judd, I want to know a little bit more about your story and how you even got involved with this. What put this issue on your radar? And perhaps even more importantly, what made you decide to take action and get involved in the way that you have?
I first came here in 2011 with my grandfather, who's an evangelist, missionary. He's started working with a mission based in Jos, and I just felt that I could help that mission out a little bit. I felt the calling to serve, and I came to Nigeria for the first time. And I fell in love with the people, fell in love with the country. And as I started coming back, wanting to serve, wanting to help out our fellow brothers and sisters here in Nigeria, I saw what was going on. I saw these attacks increase, and I saw very few organizations actually doing something about it. We see a lot of talk, but no action. You see people coming in, taking pictures of a terrible situation, raising money on it, but doing very little to actually help people. So I wanted to create an organization that actually helps persecuted Christians, is boots on the ground in Nigeria. And that's how we started.
I hear that, and it's very admirable. So why is this situation just now starting to get more attention and coverage? And why are there so many different narratives, both within and outside of Nigeria, as to what is going on? Because it's very strange. It seems like people are getting information from completely different sources, which I guess is not specific to this particular situation. But there really seems to be a lot of confusion and various types of information, misinformation, disinformation that's flying around right now.
That's a loaded question, and I will do my best to answer it and try to bring clarification to what's happening in Nigeria and why a lot of people are getting misinformation from various camps. The first thing is that the current state of the Nigerian government is guilty of being complicit in the killings against Christians. When Trump came out and made his statement recently, that made everybody scramble. That's making the Nigerian government scramble. They do not know what to do. But their first reaction is to deny what Trump is saying. I have been advocating for sanctions and some sort of recognition by the U.S. government on what's going on for years. I've been going to D.C. for years, providing evidence, providing documentation, showing the U.S. government what's going on. But for many years, the U.S. government turned a blind eye to it, especially with the previous administration. And now we have an administration that's actually willing to look at the facts and see what's happening. But the Nigerian government has a vested interest in not being designated as a country of particular concern. They have a vested interest in denying the genocide against Christians. Because if Nigeria is recognized as a country where there's genocide, you're going to see massive sanctions take place. You're going to see the foreign aid money dry up. You're going to see foreign investment dry up. And so they've always pushed this narrative of farmer-herder clashes, or unknown gunmen, or bandits. And the whole line is, well, they're killing Muslims too, and, yeah, Christians are being killed too, but it's just everybody. It's not a genocide, which is not the facts. That's not really what's happening. And the Nigerian government, so this is how Nigerian news works. I'll explain this to your folks so they get this. Nigerian news works this way. Let's say an attack occurs. The Nigerian government says this attack's bad enough, we actually need to address it. So they put on a press conference. They pay the journalists to show up, and the journalists are told to rewrite what the government told them to do. There's no investigative journalism. There's no questions. It's just they come up with a press event. The Nigerian government makes its statements. They write it down, and then it goes out. Well, after that's done, that information is taken to Al Jazeera, and then that goes to the mainstream media. So it goes through several filters before it gets to the mainstream media. And what we find is that the number of deaths that have occurred are always downplayed. So let's say there was 280 killed in one attack. They'll say it was 100. Let's say we have eyewitnesses that state it was the Fulani ethnic militia that's doing the killing. We know who did this. We know where they came from. We know what weapons they used. But all this information is completely wiped out and voided from the actual press releases that get out to the mainstream media. And that's why there's so many false narratives, because the BBC and several other news outlets will go, well, the AP article says this. They must know what's going on. Well, the person that wrote the AP article never did any investigative journalism or asked any real questions. And that is why there's such a false narrative going on, because the Nigerian government is vested in making sure that Nigeria doesn't have any accusations of genocide or designated a country of particular concern, because money will dry up from foreign interests that are giving them aid in doing business.
Yeah. Ooh, it's messed up. So you've used the term genocide quite a few times here. How do I phrase this? Is this truly what is going on? Because this is one of those terms which, sadly, I think over the last few years, it's lost a little bit of its meaning or its potency, because it's been used quite liberally. Whereas I don't know I have not looked up the exact specific dictionary definition or, international legal definition of what a genocide is. It certainly seems like the people who are committing these atrocities are genocidal themselves, but is there a certain, I don't know, are there certain statistics that need to be reached for something to be classified as that? Or is it just a matter of intent? How is that framed?
A genocide is a targeting of a specific group of people that are innocent, they're not armed. You're not in a war conflict. So if you're targeting and trying to kill a large group of people, regardless of where they come from or what ethnicity they are, if you are targeting that group for a specific purpose of killing them and removing them from their communities, that is genocide by definition. And what we're witnessing is a real genocide against Christians in Nigeria, because, and we can say Christians specifically, because they are wiping entire Christian communities off the map. and taking over territory and killing as many as they can and shoving them and removing them from where they lived. It's not an armed conflict because the terrorists have the weapons, the Christians don't. They are defenseless. Mm-hmm. And they have a government that's supposed to protect them that is not doing their job.
Further to what you said, what is the situation with the military and the police?
The military and the police, according to all of our evidence and documentation, is that they are ordered to stand down when attacks occur. There is very little evidence of any police or military engagement when these massacres happen. And I like to point to a specific incident that happened in June in Benue State, Nigeria, in a town called Yelwada, where 280 Christians were massacred. Half of them were burned alive. The other half were killed because they were trying to escape being burned alive. We, TruthNigeria.com, which is another website that I started giving access to citizen journalists in Nigeria to actually document what is happening and share with what's going on. We had intelligence 3 weeks out that Yelwada was going to be attacked. We gave notification to the police, to the military, to the Nigerian DSS that this attack was going to occur. No response. 24 hours before the attack happened, we got word that there's 200 Fulani on motorcycles with RPGs and AK-47s headed toward Yelwada. People saw something. They told us. They were telling other people. They're on the way. They're going to attack. The Nigerian government did nothing. The police and military were ordered to stand down. Then the attack occurred for over 4.5 hours, and there was no intervention by the police or military. And people that were surviving and running away from the attacks were calling the military, calling the police, asking them to come help. And no one showed up until an hour after the attack occurred. This is one clear example out of over 100 that we have documented since 2024, where they had credible intelligence, the police and military were notified, and the government did nothing.
And a lot of churches have been destroyed as well. Can you give some facts and figures on this so that people understand the scale of what's been happening?
We estimate well over 10,000 churches have been completely wiped off the map. And these aren't churches that are failing because congregations got angry and split and went somewhere else. These are churches that have been physically burned and destroyed by the Fulani ethnic militia. Well over 10,000. One of our journalists at Truth Nigeria is coming out with a report really soon. But in just a small section in the community in Taraba, we have over 60 churches. Not the entire state. I'm just talking a small 2 local government areas where over 60 churches have been completely razed, burned to the ground, and the populations have been completely displaced. That's just one example out of all the many that have happened all across the Middle Belt in northern Nigeria. They like to destroy the churches and they like to kill the pastors. This has been a common thread. They target the pastors, they target the churches. Those get destroyed first, then they go after the population.
Jeez. What do you respond? How do you respond to people who play the both sides angle? You've touched on this before, but there are people who, if you talk about this in person or publicly or online, they'll say, well, this has nothing to do with religion or even ethnicity. This is just, it's the bandit narrative, right? Christians are being killed, Muslims are being killed. I've heard some people say that more Muslims are being killed than Christians, which does not track with my knowledge and information sources. But how do you respond to that?
I don't know why they believe that narrative, but I can tell you where they're getting their information is completely wrong. Now, people are like, well, where do I get my information? I get my information from the ground because I show up. I come to Nigeria. I talk to the witnesses. We send people in to where the attacks occur. We count the dead bodies. We have real life information about what's happening, not some policy wonk sitting in DC or some somebody in Switzerland going, well, this is what I heard. This is what's really happening. They've never been here. They haven't seen the destroyed churches. They haven't seen the destroyed communities like I have. They haven't talked to eyewitnesses like I have. And for them to say, well, it's both. It's just both. They're buying into a false narrative, and you're doing what the enemy wants you to do. You're laying cover for the people committing genocide when you buy into that narrative. So that's what I say to them. I say, you're complicit in the killing of Christians if you believe this BS narrative.
What do you think is going on there? I have my own theories, I guess, but I'm trying to kind of understand the psychology here. I think that in the West, obviously in the West for all of our lives and since before we were born, whether you're from Western Europe or the UK or US or Canada, Australia, Christianity has been the dominant religion. And I think in the West, Christianity is thought of, quote unquote, as like a white man's religion. Like there's a lot of ignorance, not recognizing actually that there are far more Christians in Africa and I'd imagine in Asia than there are in the West if you're talking sheer numbers. And even as a percentage of the population, there are many countries, say in Africa, which have a much higher percentage of Christians than the UK, US, or Australia do. So it seems like it's a bit of an inconvenient narrative. Like if you think of the kind of Western, I don't know, the kind of, especially the more like liberal progressive worldview where it's like Christianity is somehow associated with whiteness and that's kind of bad and there's this guilt about that. And it's not considered like a minority thing, like the idea that Christians are persecuted sounds kind of weird to a lot of Westerners. It seems very foreign. So when there's this situation that's going on somewhere like Nigeria, where very clearly Christians are being not just persecuted, but being killed, being massacred, and people are turning a blind eye, it seems to not really fit in people's worldview. And when it doesn't fit in someone's worldview, I think they ignore or reject it, or they say, no, that can't be happening because according to my worldview, that doesn't make sense, right? Like, firstly, Christians aren't brown, but also like that's the dominant majority thing. Like, how can they be the ones being persecuted? So that's my sort of theory on what's going on here, because I think if it were perhaps an ethnic group that's smaller and less globally represented where this was going on, I don't think people would be so quick to turn a blind eye or to, I don't know, just to act like nothing is happening.
Intersectionality is not reality. Is my response to that. Intersectionality is not reality. I believe in right and wrong. And what is wrong is for innocent people to be slaughtered and removed from their homes, regardless of what you think is the majority or what power structure you think exists or what paradigm your worldview is in. I think everybody should be able to agree that the killing of innocent people is wrong. Young women, children, elderly being slaughtered and hacked to death with machetes and being shot for doing nothing wrong. I think everybody should come together and agree that's wrong and quit playing this stupid power dynamic of majority versus minority group and power structure. It's nonsense. Let's just be humans for a moment and say, can we all say that the killing of innocent people is wrong?
I used to think when I was younger and more naive that everyone actually agreed with that statement. And I've learned over the course of time, sadly, that it's not quite as universal as I previously thought.
These same people that want to play this neutral ground and want to play power structure games, they're the ones allowing, and they're complicit in the genocide against innocents. I don't care what group of people it is. You're complicit in the genocide against innocents by playing these stupid games. That's my response to those people. Now, my word, people do that. It just boggles my mind of how somebody can do that. But yeah, one of the things I was gonna get at is that when you look at Islam, radical Islam, and how they conquer territory, they've done the same thing since 640 AD. They move in, cultural jihad, they get the politics, and then they start committing violent jihad, which is conquering and killing their way to take over territory. Death by conversion, convert or die. This is how it has spread throughout all of Africa, throughout the Middle East. Now, the Middle East was once all Christian. Northern Africa was once all Christian. Entire sections of Europe were all Christian. Then the Ottoman Empire came along and conquered most of Europe. So to look at this as saying minority versus majority, what we're seeing is a dominant, radicalized religion of radical Islam that is coming in and killing and taking over territory. Now, anybody with a heart, even moderate Muslims with a heart, should look at this and say, this is bad, and this should stop.
Yeah, it's these things are very interesting for me because I grew up in Saudi Arabia. I lived in Saudi Arabia for 20 years, and I now live in the United Arab Emirates. Right, so I've spent a lot of my life living in predominantly Muslim countries, and one thing that's very fascinating about the UAE in particular is how they're so much less tolerant of this type of extremism and violence and atrocities than many Western nations are. Like I'm from the UK, and there are literally Muslim terrorist groups that are banned in the UAE and other Gulf countries, which are totally allowed and expanding in the UK. Like there's more extremism coming out of the UK, Muslim extremism coming out of the UK than coming out of the region of the Middle East that I live in. And it's very odd. I think there's this gigantic blind spot in the West where I don't know. It's a strange one. But with all that said, in recent recent weeks, there have been some updates on what's going on. As we've touched on, President Trump has put out a statement. The U.S. administration has put out a statement. Have they now officially declared Nigeria a country of particular concern? Is that set in stone now, or is the idea being floated around? Where are we at the moment?
Trump, I believe, has designated, well, he's called for the designation of it. He hasn't fully done it himself. You have to wait for Congress and Senate to officially declare country of particular concern. But Trump has moved forward. I believe he has the power to start sanctioning and start doing some things. Congress has to do their job and act. And I believe it will eventually happen. And what I would like to see is the Nigerian government just do the right thing and protect its own citizens without U.S. having to send military in and go to that extent. But I do believe that an intervention needs to happen one way or another eventually. But my prayer and hope is that the Nigerian government is incentivized and decides it loves innocent Nigerians more than it loves its terrorists. And they start taking action and defending the defenseless.
Yeah. Can you just explain to people a little bit more of what it means for a country to be a country of particular concern? Because I don't think most people had heard that until very recently.
Yeah, it's such a weird term, country of particular concern. What does that mean? Well, it means that there's now U.S. resources focused on Nigeria. They're really monitoring the situation. They're going to start putting government resources into monitoring, watching, and investigating a little bit more. But what it also does, it puts them on the list and it tells the rest of the international community that there are bad things happening in Nigeria. Don't do business with them. Don't give aid. Don't give, World Bank, quit giving them loans until this situation is addressed. And I believe that the CPC is going to be followed up with real sanctions, and we'll see what happens. But I think we're right. I think we're just about there.
Yeah. And how would sanctions help the situation? Can you kind of walk us through that? Because when you say, the cutting off of aid, I think a lot of people would think, well, wouldn't that hurt the general population rather than the government? How does that work?
Well, in theory, cutting off aid would hurt the general population, but in reality, it would prevent a lot of money getting into the pockets of corrupt politicians in Nigeria. And I think most people know that. I would hope they would know that. Because the aid that's supposedly been coming into Africa, the vast majority of it gets siphoned off before it actually gets to the people that need it. And so it's going to hurt their pocketbooks. And I think sanctions as well, where the World Bank will stop giving them loans. People will, and Americans would stop doing business with Nigeria if there's sanctions. And also, let's just be honest, there's a lot of Nigerian politicians that like to travel to the U.S. and go on vacation. Their visas would get revoked and they wouldn't be allowed to come to the U.S. anymore. And also, there would also be a prevention of, and a close eye on, dollars leaving the United States going into Nigeria. So a lot of funding would get cut off. And you hurt the pocketbook. I think it would hurt them more economically doing that than any benefit they're getting from the terrorists.
Yeah. And what's the climate like in Nigeria now that the USA has made an official statement that there could be some type of intervention? Online, I have seen mixed reactions. I've seen Nigerians at home and abroad saying, yes, this is good. The USA is finally paying attention and we would like somebody to step in. I am seeing other people saying, oh, this is just the USA trying to, invade another oil-rich country for their own benefits. And then I'm also just seeing people say, hey, this is not the USA's business. They should stay out of it. So I'm curious as to, in your experience, from what you're seeing and hearing, is there a general consensus on whether or not this is good for Nigeria and the Nigerian people?
Well, as of right now, I haven't seen the Nigerian government really doing anything to protect people as of yet. There have been attacks since Trump came out and spoke out about Nigeria. There's been attacks in Plateau. There was just an attack in Benue today, out on the road. There are people still being killed every day, and the Nigerian government really hasn't taken it seriously on the ground yet. And I'm praying that stops, that they do start taking this very seriously. Politically, they're scrambling. Because let's just be honest, if we shine a light into this darkness of corruption, I got a feeling there's going to be a lot of Nigerian politicians that have their hands dirty, if you know what I mean. So they are scrambling right now to lay cover and come up with any kind of narrative other than the truth. That's my personal opinion.
Yeah, I hear that. I want to talk a little bit more about the work that your organization is doing and has been doing. How are you helping the victims and the people who are at risk of becoming victims?
So we respond to attacks within 48 hours. These are people that were already living in abject poverty. The average Nigerian makes less than $100 a month. So imagine your entire village gets burnt to the ground. You've lost several family members. You can no longer go back to your farm the way you were living before. You have nothing left literally but the clothes on your backs. And in many cases, you've been wounded in these attacks and haven't had any treatment. So we come along with food, medicine, and aid. And we also help pay for the surgeries and help the wounded recover from their wounds. Machete wounds, bullet wounds, you name it. We try to help where we can. And then, like I said, we have 3.5 million displaced Christians living in camps. Well, a lot of these camps, they don't get help from the Nigerian government. They don't get help from the international community. So with what little resources we have, when we have it available, we deliver food. We also come in, send doctors and nurses and loads of medication to help treat the malaria, the typhoid, and the various diseases that they are getting because of the terrible unsanitary conditions that they're living in inside these camps. And the thing that makes us controversial versus other organizations is we work with village security teams. We train them on security awareness. We help provide them with radios, locally sourced bulletproof vests. And we try to train them and teach them on, if a situation comes to your village, how do you respond? Who's the first line of defense? How do we evacuate people? How do we save as many lives as possible? And we're the only organization on the ground doing that here in Nigeria. And it has been very effective. The other thing we do is truthnigeria.com, where we document and share what's really happening in Nigeria. But not only that, we've been issuing terror alerts. 100 terror alerts since 2024 with 89% accuracy. So we're doing everything we can to prevent the killing, to prevent the persecution, and to save lives. And that's what our organization does.
Yeah. Why is the defense and training aspect controversial? Why should that be controversial?
Oh, you get in different denominations in the Christian world. They don't believe in a thing called self-defense. They think they live in this world where they have a glorification of persecution and think it's glorious to watch your family be massacred, burn, and die. And I don't practice that kind of Christianity. I practice a very masculine form of Christianity, which says Christians do have a right to defend their homes, defend their families, and their communities. I'm not saying go out and aggress and go attack another community, but you darn well have a God-given right to defend yourselves and your community.
Yeah, of course, obviously. Is that criticism coming from within Nigeria, like Christian organizations and churches within the country, or do you mean more internationally?
No. Some Christian organizations, some Christian denominations. The crazy thing is when I talk to pastors and we talk to other Christians, we ask them, like, why aren't you guys politically engaged? Why aren't you engaged, in this? And somehow, somewhere down the road, some bad theology got to the Christians where they were taught it was a sin to get involved in politics, and it was a sin to defend yourself. And we're trying to correct that bad theology here. But believe it or not, I mean, I've had pastors crying and grabbing onto me going, thank you for clarifying this. I knew something was wrong with this in my heart. I just knew something was wrong. Thank you for clarifying this. Men and pastors in tears hugging me, thanking me for correcting the narrative on this.
Well, maybe it's sort of the turn the other cheek, taken to the extreme, resulting
way
in
beyond what it's meant to say.
Yeah. So for people who are listening, how can people who are listening and people who care, which I think would be the majority of people who do hear this, how can they help? Because I know a couple of weeks ago, one of the big goals was to get this on the radar of President Trump and his administration, and to make a specific statement about the persecution of Christians in Nigeria, and that has happened now. And I know that lots of people were writing in, I think, to their congressmen and women specifically about this issue, and it looks like that was successful. That's how that appears to me. So what is the next step in terms of how, a normal everyday person, whether they're in the US or the UK or Nigeria itself, wherever they are, how can they get involved? How can they help?
We need all the help we can get. One of the ways is partner with our organization, equippingthepersecuted.org. We're the boots on the ground mission. The politics is going to play itself out doing whatever they can do. But I can tell you right now on the ground, we have Christians that are starving and dying of disease that need help immediately. There are still attacks that are occurring. Christians in Nigeria need all the help they can get. And that is what Equipping the Persecuted is here for, is to be the boots on the ground, the hands and feet of Jesus, helping those in the most dire of need. And that is who we are. And I'd love it if you would partner with us at equippingthepersecuted.org, and then add the plight of the persecuted to your prayers. Put it on your prayer list. We need all the prayers we can get.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll make sure that the link is very prominent in the description. If you're listening to this podcast, if you're watching it, I'm going to make sure that the link is there so that people can contribute. Is there anything else about this situation which you feel like it's important for people to know?
I think people need to realize, geopolitically, and I didn't make the statement, but geopolitically, if Nigeria falls, so does the rest of Africa. Nigeria is the most populous country in Africa. It's one of the most mineral-rich countries in Africa. If Nigeria falls to the wrong hands, this will cascade, and millions more will die if something isn't done at this point in time in history. At right now is the time for intervention to prevent more mass death and a collapse of what could be the cascading downfall effect for all of Africa. People need to realize how important this is. It's not just little isolated attacks. You got to look at the bigger picture. If something isn't done now, it's going to get exponentially worse in the future.
Yeah, and it'll be harder to fight the later it's left. Judd, it's a difficult discussion. It's hard to talk about these topics, which is, I think a lot of people shy away from it because it is so unpleasant and harrowing. I have huge respect for the work you're doing and massive admiration. I'm very grateful for everything you're doing. And it's been a pleasure talking to you. I just want to give you encouragement. Please continue to take care of other people. Importantly, continue to take care of yourself and protect yourself in every way possible. And just keep up the good work. One more time for people listening, where can they check out your website and support people?
They can go to equippingthepersecuted.org. That's all one word, equippingthepersecuted.org. Partner with us. We'd love to have you be part of our team.
Judd Saul, thank you for coming on Real Talk with Zuby. I appreciate you.
Thank you, sir. God bless you.